Bonjour et bienvenue à tout le monde. My name is Mary Ellen Cannellan and I am the director of the Alliance Française de Chicago. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's World Monuments in Paris lecture on the Hôtellerie de la Chancellerie d'Orléans and the Hôtel de Rohan with François Bouquet, who is curator at the Archives Nationales de France's historic site in the Marais district of Paris. But before we jet off to the city of life, a reminder, as always, that we're using a Zoom webinar format. This means that you will only see the guest speakers. So please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions you have, and they will be answered by our guest at the end of the talk. Now, you're also welcome to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to communicate with all participants. Give it a try and tell us where you're listening from. We always love to learn that. This program is presented in partnership with the Alliance Française de Chicago and the Alliance Française Miami Metro, and with the communication support from World Monuments Fund, the French Heritage Society, and the Fédération des Alliances Françaises in the USA. Now a word about the Hôtellerie de la Chancellerie d'Orléans and the Hôtel de Rohan. They were built at the beginning of the 18th century by the architect German Boffrand. Before being redecorated in the 1760s by Charles De Wailly, the Hôtel particulier, known as the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, aka the Hôtel de Voyer d'Argenson, stood on the edge of the gardens of the Palais-Royal in Paris until it was demolished in 1923 to make room for its neighbor, the Banque de France. All of it but the interiors of 4 rooms. How fortunate are we? We'll be seeing those and talking about them today. They are the anteroom, the bedroom, the dining room, and the grand salon, which were painstakingly dismantled piece by piece by the Banque de France with the view to their being reconstructed one day. After 10 years of restoration work and reassembly supported by the Ministry of Culture, the Banque de France, and World Monuments Fund, the interiors of the 4 rooms were reconstructed and partly furnished by the Mobilier National in the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg, which was built during the same period as the Chancellerie d'Orléans, near the Hôtel de Soubise inside the French National Archives in the Marais. These exceptional interiors of the Chancellerie d'Orléans, which offer a wonderful sense of the splendor of Parisian decorative art at the time of the transition from the style Louis XV to that of Louis XVI, were shown to the public for the first time in October 2021. Now, a few words about Russell. Russell Kelly is the curator and moderator of the past 4 Winters lecture series, the Grand Château de la Loire and Ile-de-France, the Making of the French Gardens, the Great Churches of Paris, and the Great Museums of Paris. He's lived in Paris for 30 years and is the author of The Making of Paris, the story of how Paris evolved from a fishing village into the world's most beautiful city. So, à vous, Russell. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen, and bonjour to tout le monde from sunny Palm Beach, Florida. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, François Bouquet. François Bouquet is curator in charge of the Hôtel particulier and their decorations at the Archives Nationales de France's historic site in the Marais district of Paris. He's a graduate of the prestigious École Nationale des Chartes and the Institut National du Patrimoine, and he specializes in 18th century painting and decor as well as medieval iconography. François trained at the Musée d'Orsay and at the museums of the city of Strasbourg, and had internships at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Cloisters in New York City, which may account for his excellent English, and at the National Museum of Sweden. François is currently preparing the reopening to the public of the Hôtel de Rohan in the Marais, which, as Mary Ellen said, since 2021 features the magnificent decorations of the Orléans Chancellerie, which will be the subject of François' talk today. À vous, François.
Thank you, Russell. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour de Paris. Let's begin. So today I would like to take you on a journey and introduce you to one of the greatest adventures of the World Monuments Fund in France. The Chancellerie d'Orléans project, launched with its support in 2000, has enabled the restoration of exceptional 18th century interiors that were kept in crates for 80 years. These famous decorations, with their very special history, have been reassembled in one of the private mansions of the French National Archives. They were inaugurated, as we said, in 2021 by the Minister of Culture, and they will soon be open to the public. So I'd like to start by telling you about the history of this private mansion, and in particular, the ambitious project entrusted by the Marquis Voyer d'Argenson to the architect Charles De Wailly, which led to the creation of these truly exceptional decorations in the 1760s and 1770s. We will, of course, extend the story beyond the 18th century to examine the reasons that led to the destruction of the mansion and the crating of its interiors in 1923. We will look then together at how these decorations were rediscovered from 2000 onwards, thanks to the first inventory and then the restoration financed by the World Monuments Fund, as well as the reasons why the Hôtel de Rohan at the National Archives was chosen as the location for the reassembly of the Chancellerie d'Orléans. Finally, I would like to invite you to visit together the antechamber, the dining room, the Grand Salon, and the Marquis' bedchamber, as visitors will soon be able to rediscover the Chancellerie d'Orléans. So first, here's a map of Paris from 1733 to help us get our bearings. So you recognize on the right the Seine, here the Louvre Palace, with its long wing along the Seine, which is called the Galerie du Bord de l'Eau, which links the palace during Henri IV's reign to the Tuileries, the other palace here. But next to the Louvre and the Tuileries, the neighborhood we are going to talk about is along the Palais-Royal, which will be of particular interest to us tonight. So here's a close-up on the Palais-Royal and the private mansion, which will become the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, just here in red. So to give you a few words about the Palais-Royal, it is what we call an apanage of the Orléans family, which means, in other words, a property that is passed on to the heirs with the title of Duc d'Orléans. The Duc d'Orléans, at the beginning of the 18th century, is the nephew of Louis XIV, who is to become the regent of the kingdom when his uncle dies a few years later. So at this time, he donates a plot of land to along the gardens to his tutor and friend, the Abbé Dubois, who is going to be the chief minister during the regency. So this is where you can see a small but charming hotel is built. So here, let's have a look at the facade with its terrace overlooking the gardens that you see on the left. So I told you about the Palais-Royal and their owners. You have to know that at this time, that's very different from what we know today with the Palais-Royal and the gardens, that they are private at this time. So this is a real privilege to be able to have a view onto the gardens and an access to them. This private mansion, as we mentioned, was built by the architect German Boffrand between 1703 and 1708. The name Hôtel de la Chancellerie is what we call a convention name, recalling the use of this building, which on several occasions served as the seat of the Duke's Chancellerie. But we'll come back to this later. So let's take a moment to consider the concept of hôtel, particulier in French. An hôtel particulier refers to a richly decorated building housing a noble family. The model that prevailed in the 18th century was that of the hôtel between cour et jardin, which means that you enter the courtyard of honor from the street and before entering the main building behind which are the pleasure gardens. So that's what you find here. But what you need to know about the first story of this private mansion is that even though it was given to the Abbé Dubois in 1707, so just after he moved in, the mansion was given to the mistress of the Duke. So Boffrand at this time reprises the interior decorations work. So here is what the Grand Salon, which was in the middle of the facade overlooking the garden, what it looked like. You can see that it was decorated with high paneling with a fine gilded interlaced motif. You can also see that there is a big mirror here, and facing this mirror is another one. So Boffrand plays with the reflections and the light in this very richly decorated room. But what is very important also is that you need to know that at this time, the style we used and which was used by Boffrand was what we call la rocaille, that you can see here or in the corners, with these very intricate medallions and these overdoors painting in richly decorated frames. Another very important part of the decoration of the Grand Salon was its ceiling. The ceiling was painted by Antoine Poipel, who was the Duke's favorite painter. He had painted the ceiling of the Palais-Royal, which has now disappeared, unfortunately. It is what we call un petit goût. The style is the petit goût, which means that its subject is a light and grateful painting, echoing the circumstances of the commission. You know that this ceiling was commissioned for the mistress of the Duke. So the subject chosen was the triumph of Lord over the gods. And you need to know that this ceiling is a very beautiful one, but it also contains a moral sense that we are going to decrypt together. So here on this part of the ceiling, you can see Venus, the goddess of love. She's crowned by mischievous lovers and cupids, and around the ceiling, you can find other gods, and mischievous winged lovers are trying to disarm them. What we need to know about this ceiling is given by the son of Antoine Poipel, who wrote the biography of his father. And he says about this work, this particular ceiling, that to understand it, you have to look at three gods. So these are Jupiter, who is burning with his thunderbolt one of the winged lovers. You can also see that there is another one who throws his arrows in vain at Minerva's shield. She's the allegory of wisdom. And finally, there is Saturn, the god of time, who has grabbed the wing and holds back the angel who has seized his sight and hourglass. So this is a testament to the triumph of love, but also fragility, because 2 years later, the regent mistress was dismissed and has to leave the mansion, meaning that when you look at this ceiling, love doesn't always win, and that's what happened to this couple. The hotel was then entrusted in turn to relatives of the Orléans family. And it ends up being given to the d'Argenson family. So here on the left is the Marquis Voyer d'Argenson, and on the right, Jeanne de Mailly. Before they were given the hotel, you have to know that it became the Chancellerie d'Orléans for the first time in the 1730s, with the Comte d'Argenson, the father of the Marquis, who commissioned the decorations we are talking about today. His father was the Duke's Chancellor, meaning that he was responsible for administering his affairs and his fortune, one of the largest of the kingdom. His son, Marc René, inherits his father's hotel on his death and decides to renovate it and make it its Parisian home with the utmost taste and without sparing any expense. So this man, he has an important military career, especially as Lieutenant General of the King's armies. But, and that's what is of great interest for us, he is also a great art collector and a member of the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. All in all, he was a very interesting figure of the Enlightenment, a man who launched a formidable project on his hotel, which became a place of artistic emulation during the 1760s and 1770s. So these decorations and this project extends to all the ground floor reception salon that you can see here. These are watercolors that were drawn by William Chambers, is an English architect and a friend of Charles De Wailly. They were trained as architects together at the lessons given by Blondel, another famous French architect. And when De Wailly's work is done, William Chambers comes to Paris. He's also a friend of the Marquis Voyer d'Argenson, and he draws these watercolors that give us the sense of what these interiors looked like after the work. So on the left is the Grand Salon, and on the right, the dining room. But there are two other rooms which were not drawn by William Chambers, the antechamber, and also the Marquis' bedchamber. So let's talk about the transformation of the hotel itself. So what we can wonder at first is, as Charles De Wailly redrawn completely the private mansion. And that's the first impression that is given by the watercolor on the right, also by William Chambers, of the facade overlooking the garden. But let's have a look and closely look at the details. In reality, De Wailly has a great respect for Boffrand's work, and that's the same building. It has the same number of ground floor French doors opening to the garden, and 3 of which formed a central forecourt and opened onto the Grand Salon. You can also see that there are the same number of windows on the first floor. That's the work of De Wailly inside and outside the private mansion. He respected Boffrand's work, but it changed completely the style of the private mansion in a new and rare style in France, reminiscent of a Palladian villa in the outside of the private mansion. You can see that he hides the roof behind a false balcony on the upper floor, and he creates a portico with 4 ionic columns. So that's a complete change of the style from rocaille to this sort of Palladian villa on the outside of the private mansion. What is very important also when we look at this facade overlooking the garden is the extent of the work by Augustin Pajou, who decorated all of it with small sculptures. Actually, the facade is more ornate, and all of these sculptures for the outside part of the private mansion, but also in the salon, were commissioned by Augustin Pajou, who was the king's sculptor and also a friend of Charles De Wailly, the architect. He was also a protégé of the Marquis de Voyer, and you can see that he had a great deal of work in this private mansion. So here are two examples of these decorations that were kept when the private mansion was dismantled. On the left, you have a statue from one of the side niches, which is the bacchant holding a tambourine, which is a very big sculpture. You can't see it here, but it's more than almost 2 meters high. So like a still life sculpture. And on the right is a nymph, which stood on top of one of the large arches opening onto the dining room and the bedroom. So here are 4 nymphs which were sculpted by Augustin Pajou, and they were all preserved when the private mansion was destroyed, which was destroyed in 1923. So, but before entering the private mansion and discovering the salons, I would like to continue with the history of the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans before giving you a look at what this great work by De Wailly for the Marquis d'Argenson looked like. So let's go back to the position and the location of this private mansion next to the Palais-Royal. So what you can see here, looking at this map, is that the main attraction of this private mansion was its view and access to the gardens, which were at this time, as we mentioned, private gardens. But this privilege, in some sort, was threatened by one of the Duke d'Orléans' heirs, who became a Duke d'Orléans himself in the late 18th century. Actually, between 1781 and 1784, the Duke, as Victor Louis, built 6-story apartment building with ground floor colonnade facing the 3 sides of the palace garden. So that's what you can see here in 1784. On the outside of these wings, 3 new streets were constructed in front of the houses that had formerly overlooked the garden, including here the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans. So these are the Rue Montpensier on the west, Rue de Beaujolais to the north, and the Rue de Valois on the east. These were the names of the Duke's 3 sons, and this particular Duc de Valois, who gave his name to the street which still exists today, was Louis Philippe, who would become a few years later, 50 years later, the King of France. So that's at this time in the 1780s, the creation of the Palais-Royal's shopping arcades by his father, Philippe Égalité. So that's what you can see here in the center, the Palais-Royal gardens, and around them, the shopping arcades, and the Chancellerie d'Orléans is located just behind this wing. So let's have a look at the life of this private mansion during the 19th century. As you may have guessed, this major project was not at all to the liking of the local residents, including, we would think, the Marquis d'Argenson and his wife. And you should think of it as the construction of a block of flats right opposite your home and inside your own gardens. But actually, the Marquis and his wife don't see the project through to completion, dying in 1782 and 1783. Thus, in 1784, the mansion returns to the Duke, who makes it his chancellery again. After the French Revolution, the hotel passes into private hands. The fate of the hotel follows that of the neighborhood, as you may guess, which is very lively at the beginning of the 19th century, especially thanks to the shopping arcades. So it is used as a restaurant, game rooms, and also a ballroom. But the Marquis' decor is preserved by each successive owner, including when the hotel undergoes further alterations. So when the neighborhood becomes quieter, the hotel turns into an investment property. So that's what you can see on the right. One of its owners, a piano maker, raises it by 3 stories here So that is the facade which used to overlook the gardens of the Palais-Royal and the 3 stories which were added to this private mansion. So this piano maker, he keeps his workshop in the hotel and uses the ground floor salons with the decoration as a concert hall and sort of a showroom for his pianos in this sort of very charming setting. So this facade overlooking, which used to overlook the gardens, is now overlooking the Rue de Valois. The hotel remains renowned for its history and the quality of its decors. So it is very well known. That's why we still have photographs of the interiors before it was demolished, even at the beginning, in the late 19th century. So, and that's the reason why both its history and the quality of its decors, that it is listed as a historical monument in 1913. However, it is still threatened by a major urban development project, which is being carried out by one of its neighbors, the Banque de France. So let's have a look at the project of the Banque de France. The Banque de France is France's central bank, which means it is responsible for monetary strategy, financial stability, and services to the economy. It was set up in the Hôtel de Toulouse, near the Palais-Royal, in 1808. But it has outgrown its premises and purposes an urban planning project to the city of Paris to build new offices. This pink area is what they want, where they want to build these offices. But the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, which stood here, is a bit of a problem because they also want to use this plot of land to create a new street. So this is the yellow part. And you can see that this street, the width of this street is strictly the same as the width of the street. And as it is listed that the Parisian heritage conservationists are calling its preservation, there is a sort of a struggle for the Banque de France. But a compromise is reached by proposing that the decorations be unlisted, carefully removed by the architect of the Banque de France, and then reassembled initially in the new premises. This is the project that you can see on the right. At first, the architect of the Banque de France wanted to rebuild the whole private mansion, the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, inside the new premises. And it would have stood here in this courtyard. And you recognize the portico, and on the ground floor, the rooms where the decorations would have been reassembled. So on the left, this is the Rue du Colonel Drian, the new street, which was created where the Hôtel de la Chancellerie stood. And all that's left of this private mansion today is this very small chunk of stone from the demolished facade. So here is the street, and you can see that it is located here, just next to the Palais-Royal. So this portion of the street is where the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans stood. So to prepare the demolition of this private mansion and to be able to preserve its decorations, the architect of the Banque de France had to do a great deal of work. So that's what you can see here. It's a huge challenge for him because it involves making a precise survey of all the decors and then removing all the elements that make up the decoration of the private mansion, which means wood paneling, stuccos, which are molded when they can't be removed, parquet flooring, and even the ceilings that have to be carefully cut out. So this is the cutting plan for the ceilings of all the interiors. So here is the Grand Salon with Coipel ceiling that we've talked about earlier. But you have to know that for the Marquis Voyer d'Argenson, Charles De Wailly created for each room a specific ceiling. So there's another one in the bedchamber, another one in the dining room, and another one in the antechamber here. This is what the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans looked like in 1923 when it was stripped of its decors. So that's still the facade which used to overlook the gardens of the Palais-Royal. So here on the Rue de Valois. So this was where the Grand Salon stood. Here, the dining room, the bedchamber, and just behind them, the antechamber. So that's the only photograph that is taken at that moment, just before the complete private mansion was demolished. So that's what these decorations looked like in 1923. 104 crates, a huge puzzle made up of thousands of pieces stored in straw. So it soon becomes apparent that the project of the architect of the Banque de France to reassemble them on the premises of the Banque de France would not succeed, owing to a lack of funds following the World War II and the stock market crisis and crash of 1929. So that's a problem, and a number of projects have come to nothing. There were several propositions coming from the Administration des Beaux-Arts, the ancestor of our actual Ministry of Culture. They thought of reassembling these interiors at the Musée Carnavalet, which is the Musée of the Ville de Paris, where we keep a lot of decorations that were kept and reassembled there. But it was a huge work, and it would have fit in the museum. There was also a project in the Louvre in the 90s, at the moment when it was extended with the pyramid, and it didn't come to an end because it was too complicated, and they needed, and you will see, a huge space for the 4 rooms, which would needed to be reassembled. So the inventory funded by the World Monuments Fund in 2000 and 2001 allowed to reopen those crates almost 80 years after they were closed. But these, you have to know that these decors were a bit known thanks to an exhibition on Charles De Wailly in 1979 in Paris, and one on Augustin Pajot, the sculpture, in 1997 at the Louvre and also at the Met, in which elements of the decors were taken out of the crates and exhibited to the public. So now a word about the Hôtel de Rohan. Shortly afterwards, this inventory by the World Monuments Fund in 2000 and 2001, the idea emerges of reassembling the interiors at the Hôtel de Rohan. You can easily guess, while looking at this photograph, why it has been chosen with its large facade overlooking the gardens of the Hôtel de Rohan. Actually, it was built by the architect Pierre-Alexis de la Mer in 1705, between 1705 and 1708, for the youngest son of François de Rohan-Soubise, Armand Gaston de Rohan. So this is the plan of the family estate, with on the left in blue the Hôtel de Soubise, and on the right in red the Hôtel de Rohan. The eldest son of François de Soubise, who bought the land, this old property for the family, lived in the Hôtel de Soubise, and his brother, the youngest one, in the Hôtel de Rohan. So the two of them stood in front of each other, separated by these formal gardens. The entire estate remained in the hands of the Rohan family. The Hôtel de Soubise belonged to the descendants of Hercule Marietec, and the Hôtel de Rohan to the Rohan cardinals. Because actually, Armand Gaston, who was the Bishop of Strasbourg when the hotel was built, became a cardinal. And the Rohan family was close to the royal power, and they managed to keep this office within the family, meaning that the Parisian house and mansion was therefore handed out and down with the bishopric of Strasbourg, and it remained the residence of the Rohan cardinals throughout the 18th century. So that's why we call this Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg, because it was linked to the office and the bishopric of Strasbourg, which was kept in the family. And all that remains of the princely residence are some of the reception rooms on the first floor, which are richly decorated, and they were created for the second Rohan cardinal. So on the left, you have the drawing room where he held his concerts, with decorations referring to music, and on the right, the Chinese cabinet, decorated by Christophe Huet, who is the painter of the Singerie at the Château de Chantilly, where you can see game scenes featuring Chinese characters and small mischievous monkeys all around the room, in style of the chinoiserie, which were then in vogue. But the Hôtel de Rohan also experienced vicissitudes in the 19th century. So that's why only those two rooms were kept. It became the home of what we call in France, Imprimerie Nationale, so the National Printing Office, which was in charge of printing official texts, in particular the law bulletin. But unlike the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, this led to the disappearance of parts of the decors on the first floor and all of the salon of the ground floor, which housed the library of the cardinals. So you can see on the left the same facade of the Hôtel de Rohan as here, which overlooks the gardens. In the 1920s, the Hôtel de Rohan was also threatened with demolition, as was the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans. But the neighboring French National Archives, housed in the Hôtel de Soubise, campaigned for its preservation during on the shared history of the Hôtel de Soubise and de Rohan. So the Hôtel de Rohan was then restored. So that's the same facade you can see on both photographs. So you see that all these buildings which were created for the National Printing Office were torn down, and the facades and the gardens were restored, and also the ground floor where the archives decided to create repositories for archives, but they were in lack of room. So they used the preservation of the Hôtel de Rohan to create an extension of the Muséum des Archives on the second floor, on the ground floor repositories, and also in the outbuildings of the Hôtel de Rohan. A small anecdote about this restoration, you can see here the Fables cabinet, which is a proof that the tradition of reassembling decoration at the Hôtel de Rohan had already been established before the reassembling of the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans. It was during this period in the 1930s when the Hôtel de Rohan was restored that this cabinet was reassembled. It comes from a torn-down wing of the Hôtel de Soubise, and it is today our third jewel on the second floor, sorry, of the Hôtel de Rohan. So it is decorated with large medallions carved with Aesop's fables by Jacques Verbert, who is an artist who also worked for Louis XV for his apartments at Versailles. So you can see why this cabinet was richly decorated by one of the finest artists of this time for the Soubise family. So this is a model of what we call the Archives quadrangle, which is 3 hectares greenery in the heart of the Marais district. So here stands the Hôtel de Rohan, here the Hôtel de Soubise. So the Hôtel de Rohan in the 1930s became a part of the Archives quadrangle. So the National Archives now only hold archives dating from before the French Revolution on the quadrangle. All contemporary archives were moved in 2012 to new repositories built on a second site to the north of Paris. So it was at this time that the ground floor of the Hôtel de Rohan was freed up, making the project to rebuild there the Chancellerie d'Orléans interiors possible. So in addition to researchers in the reading room, which is here, the archives welcome almost 300,000 visitors a year in the museum housed in the Hôtel de Soubise, soon to be joined by the Hôtel de Rohan. The Hôtel de Rohan will be open to the public in two phases. Firstly, the Chancellerie d'Orléans on the ground floor this year, followed by the second floor. And we are currently completing the studies for its restoration and continuing seeking sponsorship to support the restoration of the decors you saw earlier. So now that you've grasped the reason for reassembling the decors in the Hôtel de Rohan, let's get back to the project itself. So once the inventory was done and a site had been identified, it was time to rebuild this immense jigsaw puzzle. So you can see here pieces of stucco from the bedroom, the bedchamber, with small putties and modillions of the cornice. And on the right, pieces from the Grand Salon with these shield-shaped medallions, garlands, and trophies of honor. So what you need to understand is when we open the crates, these pieces of decorations were well preserved, but they needed restoration. So every piece needed to be restored and find its place in this gigantic puzzle. So before reassembling the pieces at the Hôtel de Rohan, it was necessary to ensure that they were the right size. So it was not a problem to remove the pieces of decor from the building which was torn down and demolished, but it was very complicated to reassemble 4 rooms in a private mansion with its own constraints. So that's the reason why a number of blank reassemblies have been carried out. So that's what you see here in a big storage unit where the decorations were restored. There were several blank reassemblies to make sure that the rooms would fit in the Hôtel de Rohan. So every piece of this puzzle needed to be restored. So here is one of the 10 pieces of the Grand Salon's ceiling by Antoine Coipel being restored. And this is one of the big parts of the challenge of rebuilding all these decorations, is that these ceilings needed to be reassembled and being put inside the Hôtel de Rohan. The Hôtel de Rohan itself required major alterations to be able to welcome these decorations. So this is the ground floor I mentioned, where we used to have repositories for the archives on the left. And what you can see on the right is that to accommodate the vaulted ceiling on the ground floor of Coipel's ceiling, the floor had to be lowered by around 70 centimeters, so 28 inches, as much as possible before reaching the cellar vaults underneath the ground. And what you see above the room here is the concrete slab that replaced the beams and the joists that supported the parquet flooring of the cardinal's dining room on the second floor. So every centimeter counted in this operation. I insist on this particular room because it was the most complicated, the Grand Salon. It's the one that necessitated lowering the floor and determine the layout of the 3 other rooms, which were also rebuilt on the ground floor of the Hôtel de Rohan. So the crates containing the ceiling pieces were transported through the windows of the Hôtel de Rohan. On the right, you can see the 10th and last piece of the ceiling, which was located in the center. It is being attached to the supporting structure. So this structure was designed by engineers to support the 10 tons, so more than 2,000 20,000 pounds, sorry, weight of the ceiling. So at this moment, the precise moment, it was lowered so that each piece can be secured before putting the ceiling up. So that's what it looked like when it went up to 6 meters high. And you can see all the pieces, all the 10 pieces of Poipes ceiling reassembled. So only when this ceiling was reassembled and went up 6 meters high, was it possible to start reassembling the room's decor. So starting with the paneling and the doors, then we added the sculptures, and finally the stucco cornices that conceal the structure itself here. So it's essential for you and for me to show you that all original elements have been reassembled whenever possible. So everything you see here comes from the Hôtel de la Chancellerie. Only the broken elements have been replaced and recreated. So you can see them in white. And as for the cornice, you can see the care taken to replace all the garlands and the modillions, which can be distinguished by their original gilding. The rest of the cornice, which obviously could not be removed, has been restored thanks to the molds made by the architect of the Banque de France in 1923 for this purpose. So obviously, these details of the decor's history were subsequently masked by the restoration, as we will discover now. So now I invite you to visit the salons designed by Charles De Wailly for the Marquis de Voyer. You see their refinement and very distinctive style, which in the early 1770s already announced neoclassicism in De Wailly's own eclectic vein. So as I lead you along the path of the Marquis and his wife's guests, I invite you to observe the decorative crescendo designed by De Wailly, the architect. So let's start with the antechamber. This is the first room entered by the visitors, and it was decorated between 1767 and 1770. So more than any other room, the antechamber has been frequently transformed and modified. It has therefore proven impossible to reassemble in its entirety. So what you see represents only half of its original surface. In contrast to other rooms, Charles De Wailly designed for the Marquis the antechamber using mineral decor with a simple color palette. So the decor is treated in grisaille, which is a monochrome of beige. The vestibule in which to wash away the walls colors, it's like a palette cleanser. So this is where De Wailly's decorative progression begins, leading to the Grand Salon. So the double room's marble floor is punctuated by a series of end columns topped with capital inspired by the Athens Erechtheian temple with fluted trompe-l'œil. As in other rooms in the mansion, Charles De Wailly placed as many mirrors as possible against the wall to enlarge the space. More than you can see today, because in this setting, due to the many transformations of this room in the 19th century, we couldn't put as many mirrors as used to stand in this antechamber. This antechamber is sometimes called the gallery or the vestibule, and it was much admired by the contemporaries, such as the Duc d'Orléans himself. During a visit in 1770, he stated that he enjoyed the columns of the vestibule given the effect of the mirrors, which he had not before seen. This is the ceiling of the antechamber. Echoing the classical theme, De Wailly opted for a flat ceiling in the same color scheme, which he entrusted to the painter Gabriel Briard. So in the center of the work, on another crown, houses a Roman eagle, and around the edges, 6 bas-relief compartments which are fake, painted. They are decorated with arabesque and small medallions. And these represent the labors of Hercules. So in the four corners of the ceiling, you can see also here, for example, the initials M and V for Mailly and Voyer. Le Marquis Voyer d'Argenson and Jeanne de Mailly, his wife. And these initials appear for the first time in the decorations, intertwined. And it is later repeated in the dining room and the bedroom. Of the two identical ceilings that originally adorned the room, only one remains. The other was removed in the mid-19th century. The simplicity of the antechamber's decors contrasts sharply with its exceptional rich furniture. So this is the Chimera console. It is decorated as a typical furniture by Charles De Wailly and his ornamental repertoire. It was De Wailly was really renowned during his lifetime for an originality that sometimes took him beyond the bounds of reason and good taste, according to his friend William Chambers, the one who drew the watercolors. And this design with the Chimera became quickly famous. So take a look at it, at this particular piece of furniture, because we'll somehow find it again in the dining room. So the decor of this room was distinctly mineral, and also typical for this time of room. It was unique in a number of features. So to compensate the narrowness of this room, again, and create an illusion of space, Charles De Wailly increased the number of mirrors in the middle of the walls, here, and on the doors at the back of the room. But there's an important part of this decor which has disappeared, unfortunately, but we can know what it looked like thanks to Chambers' watercolor. In the original layout, there were even more mirrors. Here, for example, on the two panels facing the doors of the Grand Salon, here is only a wall, but it was treated as a fake door frame with a mirror put in it. So all the walls therefore reflected either the daylight or the light from the chandeliers. And you can see on Chambers' watercolor another decorative element that has been the subject of much discussion during the project, De Wailly's project. The dining room decor decisions have been much debated in numerous letters that are kept. They are a great source for the work that has allowed the assembly of the decorations. In these letters between the Marquis de Voyer, Charles de Wailly, the architect, and one of their friends, a man of letters, Julien David Leroy, who published a survey of ancient monuments in Greece. So these large female figures, or caryatides, were inspired by the caryatid of the Erechtean temples on the Acropole in Athens. And they were admired and published by Leroy a few years earlier. So these were sculptured by Augustin Pajou and intended as a precise reference to the ancient monument being rediscovered at this time. They were bronzed and gilded, and unfortunately they disappeared from the decor in the 1790s. So we don't know if they were then destroyed or sold, maybe by the Duc d'Orléans when this private mansion became the Chancellerie d'Orléans again after 1784. Also in the dining room, above the big mirrors, so at the top of the side walls, on the cornice, there are two bronzed and gilded sphinxes, which hold a medallion in fake profile. So you can see again the letters V and M, which are intertwined, another homage to the names of the owners of this private mansion. You can sense the architect's ability to draw a wide range of references from Greek or Roman antiquity, especially with the ceiling adorned with grotesque decorations, to Egypt. So De Wailly is highly eclectic and you can sense is this vein of eclectic and neoclassical style. Also in this dining room, you know that we talked about it. Each room had a different design and a different ceiling, painted ceiling, and De Wailly chose for this one imposing corner arches, which meet at the central oval. The first painter who was commissioned for this ceiling was Fragonard. He works 2 years on this project that he abandons. So that's a bit odd for us, but you need to know that what he proposed to the Marquis Voyer d'Argenson and to De Wailly, they didn't like it. So we don't know if that's a question of subject or style, because there is no trace of what he proposed. Instead, the Marquis chose Jean-Jacques Lagrenet, who proposes a new composition entitled Hébé, serving nectar to Jupiter, which is a subject frequently suited to the purpose of a dining room. And now look at the piece of furniture Jupiter is leaning against. Do you recognize it? So you can see that it is the camera console that we saw in the antechamber, and you can see how in each room, though very different, is seen by De Wailly as a component of his total work of art. So now we are entering the Grand Salon, paneled in mirrors and covered in gold. So that's how an English visitor described the Chancellerie d'Orléans Grand Salon in 1775. So this is the mansion's main room, located at the center of the building, and its 3 French doors opened onto the garden of the Palais-Royal. Charles De Wailly masterfully transformed the Grand Salon into a profoundly personal achievement, while retaining not only most of the features created by his predecessor, German Boffrand, but also the beautiful ceiling Antoine Coipel painted more than 60 years before his work for the Marquis. So you can see here in the Grand Salon, Coipel's ceiling restored and reassembled, which is one of the masterpieces of these interiors, which is not due to De Wailly's work, but it was kept because it was already considered in the 1760s as a masterpiece. And what you need to know also about this Grand Salon, sorry, I forgot to mention that it is firstly for De Wailly an homage to the Grand Louis XIV style, with those big arches, which were a component of the decor created by Boffrand already. These arches are arranged around the room in a tripartite order. So in this room too, you find the trick of the face-to-face mirrors in the middle, on which De Wailly adds half balustrades and also half chandeliers, which creates a very refined sense of expansion of the room and a great trompe-l'œil. So about this Grand Salon, sorry, I also forgot on this slide, we need to talk a bit about the iconographic theme, which is twofold. So on the one hand, you have in the decor created by De Wailly a warlike vein with these medallions treated like shields placed on lion skins, whose quilted obverse is found in the corners of the room, and you also have military trophies. I told you earlier that the Marquis Voyer d'Argenson was a lieutenant general of the royal armies for Louis XV. And on the other hand, when he creates this decoration, De Wailly extends the theme of Coipel's ceiling with the reference of the Olympian divinities. So you find them painted in the doors with their attributes in the manner of faux bronze, but also in the dessus de porte, over the doors, sculpted by Pajou, where they symbolize the 4 different elements. So let's move to this other part of the decoration. When you visit today the Grand Salon, you witness another of this project's small miracles, these very particular armchairs. Charles De Wailly is as much an interior designer as he was an architect. So he creates a set of chairs for the Grand Salon, including several chairs and 8 large and stylistically unique armchairs. So you can see their shape, a fully sculpted armchest, and they are very particular of De Wailly's reputation for originality. So that's why we could recognize them when they appeared on the art market, because all of the Chancellerie d'Orléans furniture has been entirely dispersed after the French Revolution. But these 2 specific pairs of armchairs were located on the art market in 2012 and 16, and they have been restored, reupholstered in a fabric with period motifs, and rewoven in the original colors. Finally, the Marquis' bedchamber. So we now end our tour with the last room of reception apartments, which is also a more intimate room. So the Marquis' bedchamber was located at the end of the Grand Salon on the garden side with a cabinet at the back. This room was reserved for the mistress of the house, while her husband, the Marquis de Voyer, lived on the 2nd floor with their children. Unfortunately, we only have drawings of the very richly decorated bed. So this gilded wooden bed is from the same period, but it is a bed lent by the Mobilier National, and it doesn't come from the Chancellerie de Rohan. Concerning the decor, the room repeats the 3-party theme from the Grand Salon with the big arches, but with original details. Other rooms of the mansion make classical references to the Louis XIV style and antiquity, but the bedroom stands out in its use of regular forms that more closely align with the Italian Baroque. So look at this delicate interior where the dominant tone is gold. And note this very charming detail. The clouds of the ceiling descend onto the walls in an illusionist fashion, as you might see in a church in Rome, for example. So this is the last ceiling painted for the Marquis Royer d'Argenson and his wife. Once again, De Wailly designed a magnificent ceiling for this room, which was painted by Louis-Jacques Duramel. It depicts the rising of the dawn with a skillful trompe-l'œil effect that I assure you, when you stand in the room, is even more striking than on this photograph, which gives the impression that it opens onto a very beautiful sky with the colors of dawn. Also about this ceiling, sorry, I forgot to mention this theme is illustrated by this allegory with Apollo, who approaches here holding the reins of the sun chariots. And here is Diana, his sister, who is awakening from sleep in a very sumptuous drapery. And she gives way to his arrival. And below her, you can see 2 fleeing bats, which symbolize this fading night. So it's amid the clouds of this dreamlike composition that our visit of the Chancellerie d'Orléans comes to an end. So unfortunately for the moment, we only open the doors of the Hôtel de Rohan for guided tour of the Chancellerie d'Orléans once a week. Work is currently underway in the gardens just in front of the Hôtel de Rohan, but hopefully these will be completed this autumn. So if you're in Paris at the end of this year, don't hesitate to visit the National Archives, and which stand in the Marais district, to see these exceptional rooms with your own eyes. And we will be happy to welcome you.
Thank you so much, Francois, for that excellent presentation. Those are some wonderful images. Both, it was fascinating to see the prints from the back in the 18th century of the rooms, and then to see the photographs of the same rooms today. And I guess it was pretty helpful when tracking down those armchairs that you could identify them. You say they were bought on the art market in 2012 and 2016. Were there, who keeps an eye on that sort of thing? How did you find these chairs?
You know, this project of reassembling the decors has been in itself in the crates for a long time. So there were several people aware of what these decors looked like, and also the furniture. There was a scientific council which guided this project of reassembling the decors, and they kept their eyes wide open for these. And some of these armchairs and also the chairs I mentioned, we know their location. They are kept by art collectors, and some of them we know where they are located. These particular pairs, I know that one of them, but they are not very comfortable, but they are unique and very impressive. And I know that one of them was kept on a private yacht, for example. So they had their own life, and the curators in charge of furniture collections, they know them very well. So we have a lot of pair of eyes open for them.
Okay. And the pair had been split up. There were two different owners.
Yes, two different owners, and we know that other pairs which are kept by art collectors somewhere.
Okay. So, I mean, you covered a lot of territory there. I particularly found it fascinating the way the arcades were built in front of or behind the Palais-Royal, which, as I had never understood that they had been built in front of the houses that were previously overlooking directly the private garden. And I can only imagine the disappointment of the inhabitants of those houses when all of a
There were
sudden.
petitions. The Marquis Royer d'Argenson and his wife, they signed a petition, but they died before the project was done. But all the inhabitants that lived along the gardens, they signed a petition, but the Duke of Orleans didn't flinch.
Uh-huh. Who was a cousin of the king?
No, he was not a cousin of the king, but that's another branch of the French royal family, the Orleans. And this branch, that what I mentioned 50 years later, would come to at the head of the state, because the Orleans branch, after the French Restoration, there's the Monarchie de Juillet, and they will become kings. So that's another branch of the royal family, a very distant cousin of the the 16th.
Okay, but he had a more piston than did the Marquis de Voyer.
Yeah. But they were very powerful. They had a huge fortune before the French Revolution.
Okay. And it's also, it was fascinating that you showed those photographs of what happened to the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans becoming a piano shop. And similarly, the Hôtel de Rohan becoming a printing shop. When did those two spectacular hôtels particuliers stop being aristocratic residences and were taken over by commercial interests?
And not really at the same time. For the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, it happened when the neighborhood of the Palais-Royal became more quiet, when the activity moved to the Grand Boulevard around the middle of the 19th century. For the Hôtel de Rohan, it was earlier. After the French Revolution, the Rohan family moved, and the state bought this very big property with the Hôtel de Soubise and Hôtel de Rohan. And during the French Empire, when Napoleon was the empire, they split the property in two parts. And the Hôtel de Soubise was given to the National Archives in 1808. And at the same time, the Hôtel de Rohan was given to the National Printing Office. So that's when they settled. So both these administrations settled in private mansions, which were not really particularly fitted for the activity. So that's why they were a bit transformed.
I see. Okay. So started with the revolution,
Yes.
I say. And when do you, so going back to the four rooms that were transferred, they were the most lavishly decorated, no doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, for sure. We don't really know very much about the, for example, the Marquis' bedroom because it didn't really live often in this private mansion. So we don't really know a lot about the decorations of the second floor. So there were the very important parts of the decors were all located on the ground floor of the Hôtel de la Chancellerie.
Okay. I suppose that was fairly typical of Hotel Particulier. These were the grand rooms on the ground floor.
It depends. For example, at the Hôtel de Soubise, which is way bigger than the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans, because it was built for princes and princesses. And on the ground floor, you have the prince's apartments, but the most impressive decors are located on the second floor, which is the princesses, where the princesses' apartments are located. On the ground floor, you have exquisite decors, but not as gilded and as lavish as on the second floor, because you have the great view on the gardens when you are on the second floor.
Was it ever considered to preserve the facade of the Hôtel de la Chancellerie d'Orléans with its magnificent Palladian structures?
I think for maybe at the very beginning, but it was very, very complicated to demolish it and preserve all the stones composing the facade. So I think when the architect of the Banque de France drew this project with rebuilding the whole private mansion in the premises, he had in mind that he could preserve even the stones composing the facade, but it was way too complicated. So quickly they abandoned this proposition.
It's quite impressive that, as you pointed out, that these 110 crates remained in storage for 80 years.
Yes.
Were they forgotten or were
Not
waiting?
really. There were people aware of this engagement engagement that the Banque de France took to rebuild them. So regularly, the Ministry of Culture received letters from people asking when the Banque de France is going to rebuild these decorations. And also there were those two exhibitions, the 1979 about De Wailly, and some of the pieces of the decors were shown to the public at this moment. And even more for the Pajou exhibition, because it was these pieces, the overdoors, blue and gilded overdoors from the Grand Salon, which symbolized the four elements, they were, for example, shown to the public at the Met and at the Louvre. And so there was, in the public opinion, more than the few specialists aware of the existence of these decors.
Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up now, but let me just say that I really urge people in the audience out there to visit this wonderful, you did call it the quadrangle, the garden that separates the Hôtel de Soubise on the one side and the Hôtel de Rohan on the other side, because it is truly one of the most beautiful secret gardens in Paris, in the, I guess it's the third arrondissement.
Yes.
Just north of the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois. And the reason it's a secret garden is because it's hard to find. If you go to the Hôtel de Soubise and turn right, then you will enter the garden. But if you're from the north, there's only a narrow way next to the reading room and so on. And you said that someday there will be a new entrance on the right, the road to the right, the name of which escapes me,
Rue du Temple.
Rue Vieille du Temple.
Yes.
So, but still, it's going to be a bit of a secret garden, but it's well worth going to. The garden itself is lovely, and the Hôtel de Rohan has a spectacular facade. I haven't been in it yet, but I will not fail to go there when I'm next in Paris, and I urge everyone else to do so too. So thank you very much, Francois, for introducing us to the hotel and its spectacular interior decorations. So I will thank you, Francois. Thanks to our partners for their support. Thanks to you all for joining us today. And we hope to see you next week, same time, same place, when Alexandre Gady will tell us about the World Monument Fund's exciting new project in Paris that was announced just yesterday. And for those of you who were not paying attention, the new project is the restoration of the Chapelle de la Sorbonne, the Chapel of the Sorbonne, which was commissioned by Cardinal Richelieu and built between 1634 and 1642, and is one of the earliest Baroque churches in Paris with a spectacular dome, and it's where Richelieu's tomb resides. And Alexandre Gady, a professor of art history at the Sorbonne, author of many books about the architecture of Paris, and a member of the Scientific Committee of World Monuments Fund France, is uniquely qualified to tell us the story about this iconic monument. So we urge you to join us. And in the meantime, thank you again, Francois Bouquet.
Thank you for the invite.
Et au revoir.
Au revoir.